I'm going to speak on several concepts, and rather than explain them to you, I'm going to array them in a particular order. Anything you do not understand, you can feel free to look up. I will attempt to be as clear spoken as possible so that the captioning of YouTube will be able to pick these things out. Anything that I happen to notice that is not correct in the captions, I will attempt to at least correctly spell in the description, but I'm not giving information. I'm simply arraying concepts. Quantum field theory basically posits that the space-time continuum, as we understand it or know it, is made of several different fields. These would be like overlaid, if you've got microwaves and gamma rays and radio waves all in, broadcasting within a chamber, that would be like three different fields kind of idea, but on a deeper scale than that. The Higgs field is basically, think that it's a higher dimensional pool. It's certainly more than 3 dimensions, I believe. It encompasses pretty much everything as far as we know, and anything that interacts with that field perturbs that field, and the perturbations in that field represent the resistance of the object within the field. The higher the resistance, the higher the mass. The lower the resistance, the lower the mass. Massless particles have zero resistance. This seems to be what regulates the speed of causality, or at least it moves in tandem with it. There are other fields, the electron field. All electrons, I believe they are slightly massive, but mostly massless. Maybe they are point particles. I don't remember. Anyways, there would be there's a lepton field, and there is a hadron field, and there is probably a gluon field. Each type of particle, by the standard model, would have one of these fields within which they interact. Some of these, at certain energy levels, become the same field, depending on how hot or how cold, what kind of pressure. A good example would be the weak nuclear force and electromagnetism. They become the electroweak force at certain points. It has also been seen that at high enough energy densities, the strong force would also become the same. So these fields in certain places get pinched. In other places, simply the perturbations propagate. The bumps move around in the field. And I believe there may be a further tier or echelon of field. In terms of higher dimensionality, we perceive 3 dimensions of space plus time. I believe there are other dimensions, such as where each space-time is one of an option in probability. That is a dimension of movement, selecting probability, affecting odds. If you have any ability to affect your odds, you are moving within what I would consider the 5th dimension. However, each of these tiers of dimensions, in this sense, would be causal. So you've got, if 3 plus 1 for space and time, the 5th being movement within probabilities, the 6th being basically derivation of outcomes, or perception of outcomes, but being able to perceive all the outcomes at the same time would be very confusing. 7th dimensional, you could perceive outcomes clearly, which would mean that an 8th dimensional or higher nature would be required to simply affect causality. So being able to discern an outcome can give you some ability, but there are also many instances in which when you know something and you're trying to do something about it, it just causes it to happen anyway. So this is one way of thinking of it, in sense of we think of spatial dimensions, but we don't necessarily always include time correctly. So you would have fields within the continuum, but as well you would have this temporal dimensionality. Now on top of that, there is spatial dimensionality, which is not quite the same, I don't think. This would be when they talk about, in a three-dimensional universe, a fourth-dimensional observer moving a sphere through, all you would see a small dot become a sphere, and at the midsection of the sphere passing through our three-dimensional continuum, we would see the largest sphere, as its true size, and then as it continued to pass through in the same direction, we would see it begin to shrink and then vanish. The other way of looking at something like that is when you have, when you look at like the hypercube or tesseract, which is the cube within a cube, said to be a fourth dimensional object. That is merely the shadow of, it is a three-dimensional appearing shadow, two-dimensionally represented, to be of a fourth dimensional cube. Now, in reality, the cube would be undulating constantly, much like the way that they showed it in S. Darko, when the tesseracts were falling from the sky. They would be moving like that, in some sense. However you move around it would affect how it moves, I believe. And it wouldn't be, it might cast a shadow, but most likely there would be, its shadow itself would be I don't know, I guess you could cast a 2D shadow on a flat surface, shining light through a not solid or opaque fourth dimensional object being passed through a three-dimensional universe. I'm getting this out as context to think about a higher realm. It's a plane that is not necessarily a field interacting with the other fields of the cosmos or whatever, of our space-time, our continuum, but a plane in which such a higher dimensional being would interact with universes, and each universe would probably represent a sphere to them. And the shrinking and growing of that sphere as they would probably just think it and it would happen, because, or it depends on how, what angle you approach it from, maybe. I'm not, fully up on that experience. But the thing I'm trying to get out is that the expansion of the universe represents time, I believe, so far as what we have it as. So basically what we're perceiving as Big Bang and Big Crunch concepts are basically beginning and end of a finite continuum for the purposes of observation. So if you had such a thing and you were to contract or expand it, I guess is the words I'm wanting to use, to reach certain points within that space-time where then you would be able to take that slice and understand that moment or whatever. What if there was a concept that needed to be placed into that universe that exceeded the universe's, that particular universe's limits? What would happen? Would you have to incorporate that smaller universe into the larger concept and create a new universe? Would you have to find some way to compactify the larger concept and attempt to slip it into the universe? Is that in fact what causes the expansion of the universe? Or would it simply cause the universe to be ruined? Is that possible? Is that such a thing? This has been on my mind lately. I've not been able to articulate it until now. Only after a lot of desperation and upsetness have I even had the ability to force this into being within my mind. So, If you have a concept that is too big for your mind, but you try and fit it anyway, it can drive you mad. So I wonder about the universe. If such a mind took a concept and then attempted to fit it into reality, would it drive reality mad? Is that, in fact, what we are experiencing at this moment? That last one was the only non-rhetorical question.